Following 7 years and 81 games in charge, Steve Clarke has stepped down as Scotland manager following elimination from the World Cup group stages. There's been a lot said about his tenure, with a lot of people having been against him from early on, and others defending him until the very end. Seeing as it is a seemingly complex and emotional debate, I'm going to throw my opinion into the ring, looking at where Scotland were before Clarke took over, his tenure as a whole, and whether he goes down as a failure, a god, or somewhere in the middle. Following a third place finish with Kilmarnock, Steve Clarke was given the Scotland job following the resignation of Alex McLeish thanks to an abysmal start to Euros qualifiers. Having won their Nations League C group despite a loss to Israel, Scotland started their qualification campaign with a 3-0 loss to Kazakhstan, a nation ranked in 117th, while Scotland were 40th in world rankings, in a game that many people considered to be one of the nation's worst defeats, before following it up with an unconvincing 2-0 win away to San Marino, a result that saw McLeish and the team booed off, with McLeish himself resigning a month later. Clarke would take charge for the rest of Euro 2020 qualifiers, where his first game would be a home fixture against Cyprus, which saw a very scrappy 2-1 win, with Ollie Burke scoring the winner in the 89th minute. Looking back on the squad then, you can understand why it was so scrappy. His next game would be a trip to Belgium to face the side ranked number 1 in the world. No, I still don't understand why they were ranked number 1, and unsurprisingly Scotland fell to a 3-0 defeat with goals coming from Lukaku and Kevin De Bruyne. The next international window would see back-to-back home games, but both would see defeats. Despite taking the lead, recent World Cup quarter-finalist Russia would turn it around, with the deciding goal being a Stephen O'Donnell own goal, before a convincing 4-0 loss to Belgium. Final 3 games, however, would be a lot better, with a 6-0 win against San Marino, another 2-1 win against Cyprus, and a 3-1 win against Kazakhstan. Thanks to these last 3 games, Scotland would end up finishing third, but because of McLeish winning the Nations League group, Scotland still had a chance of qualifying through the playoffs. Scotland would be placed in Path C, where they would have a semi-final against Israel, with potential final opponents being Norway or Serbia. These games were meant to take place in March, but of course, COVID came along and postponed the fixtures until October. In front of an empty Hampden, a turgid affair would see Scotland be involved in their first goalless draw since 2013, and the game would go to penalties. Eran Zahavi, however, would see his efforts saved, and with Scotland scoring all of their penalties, a trip to Belgrade awaited them. This was Scotland's first playoff final since they played the Dutch in Euro 2004 qualifying. We don't mention the score. And was a massive opportunity against a side that was ranked 31st in the world. After a promising first half, Scotland would finally get a deserved opener thanks to Ryan Christie's strike in the 52nd minute, but despite many more chances to extend the lead, Scotland would fall back into old habits and Luka Jovic would equalise from a corner in the 90th minute. Having survived the Serbian onslaught in extra time, penalties would be the decider to see who would make it to the Euros. After a perfect opening 8 penalties from both sides, Kenny McLean would score his to make it 5-4, meaning Serbia had to score to stay in it. Thankfully for them, Alexander Mitrovic was up next. David Marshall, however, a man who had not long been relegated from the Championship with Wigan, would be the hero to send Scotland to their first tournament since 1998 and their first Euros since 1996. It also meant that Steve Clarke would be the first Scotland manager at a tournament since Craig Brown at both those prior mentioned tournaments. Of course, it should be mentioned that Scotland only got into these playoffs thanks to McLeish winning a Nations League C group, but during the playoffs, Scotland would finish second in their Nations League B group, just 2 points behind the Czechs, who Scotland beat in both games, with a failure to beat Israel in either game or a defeat to Slovakia in what was their only win, being the difference between qualification to League A. I think considering the results under McLeish at the end versus Clarke at the start, I don't think McLeish would have got through these playoffs. Before the start of the Euros, however, World Cup qualifying would start with Scotland being drawn in a group with Moldova, Faroe Islands, Austria, Denmark and Israel. Again, I'm not sure what was going on at UEFA during this time period, as between 2018 and 2021, Scotland played Israel 7 times. We hadn't played each other since 1986 before that. 3 games would be played before the Euros, a 2-0 draw at Hampden against Austria, a 1-0 draw away against Israel, and a 4-0 win over the Faroe Islands. The summer, however, would see Scotland finally take part in a tournament, but having qualified through the playoffs, Scotland were placed in pot 4 and were given a pretty tough group with Czechia, who were ranked 40th in the world, Croatia, who were ranked 14th, and of course 4th in the world, England. The first game came against the Czechs at a mostly empty Hampden Park. Having got a win and a draw against them in the past 12 months, there was an expectation that we could get a win, and at minimum a draw. But Patrick Schick heading home from a corner just before half-time, before David Marshall became a living meme after being beaten at the halfway line in a 2-0 defeat. Next up was a trip to Wembley to take on England in what was the 115th meeting between the two sides, and the first since a 2-0 draw at Hampden 4 years earlier. Again, we don't talk about how that game ended. Scotland, however, would bounce back from a defeat against the Czechs and would earn a draw that many people joked was a 0-0 victory. Our final game was then arguably our most difficult, a match against the previous World Cup runner-up, Croatia. Nikola Vlasic would open the scoring, but Callum McGregor would score the equaliser and Scotland's first goal at a tournament since Craig Burley against Norway in 1998. Hope was restored. It's time to get that win and get out of the group stages for the first time. Second half goals from Modric and Perisic would end that dream as Scotland finished bottom of their group. It was time to move on though, as the rest of World Cup qualifying was starting, but it went disastrously as a 2-0 defeat away against Denmark left us 7 points off the top, with Austria and Israel ahead by 2 points. There would, however, come a turnaround. Lyndon Dykes would score the only goals in games against Moldova and Austria. A classic would be played out at Hampden, with Scott McTominay scoring with his chest in the 94th minute to defeat Israel 3-2, in a result that saw us go 4 points clear in second with 3 games to play. Lyndon Dykes again would prove to be the hero with a late winner away against the Faroes. Patterson and Adams would score to give us a 2-0 win away against Moldova, before a final fixture at Hampden would see Scotland secure a 2-0 win against group winners Denmark in what was a convincing end to the qualifiers. In the final 6 games, Scotland won 6 with 5 clean sheets, and Scotland ended up as the best second place team, even when you adjust for points per game, and were absolutely the informed team going into the playoffs. 2 friendly draws against Poland and Austria would come, but then Scotland were drawn against Ukraine. This Ukraine side were the worst second place finisher. They had only recorded 2 wins, but had 6 draws, including 2 against France. In February, however, war had broken out as Russia invaded Ukraine, and in an act of solidarity, Scotland would lose 3-1 to see Ukraine go to the playoff final. Wales did not get the memo, evidently. While there was obvious disappointment at failing to qualify for the World Cup in Qatar, there was definitely some positive momentum that could be taken into the upcoming Nations League B campaign, where we would be drawn in a group with Armenia, Ireland and Ukraine. 2 convincing wins over Armenia would sandwich a concerning 3-0 defeat in Dublin, but the second half of the group would see a 3-0 win at Hampden against Ukraine. Could we not have done that earlier, lads? Followed by a 2-1 win against Ireland before a 0-0 draw against Ukraine and Krakow would see Scotland top the group, guaranteeing a playoff for the Euros and promotion to League A. This could be important as when it comes to the qualification group, we got given a pretty difficult draw. Cyprus would be the whipping boys for a group that involved Georgia, who won their Nations League C group, had caused us plenty of pain in the past and had Kvici Kvaratskhelia, Norway, who have Erling Haaland, and Spain, who I don't think need any introduction. The campaign would open with a 3-0 victory against Cyprus, which was helped by 2 late goals before Spain would visit Hampden. This was a match that will be remembered for a long time as a double from McTominay and a complete meltdown from the Spanish saw Scotland come out 2-0 winners, a result that saw us go top of the group. The June window would see a trip to Oslo where, after limiting Haaland to only scoring a penalty, the late additions of Dykes and McLean would combine for an incredible 2-minute turnaround right at the death to continue Scotland's perfect record for the campaign. Next up was Georgia at Hampden, and after Callum McGregor opened the scoring while the pitch was only slightly waterlogged, the game would be paused for 90 minutes as groundskeepers brush away the deluge. Upon resumption though, McTominay was striking the second half to give Scotland a 2-0 win, something finalised after Kvaratskhelia skied his penalty at the end. September meanwhile would only see 1 game for Scotland in qualifiers with a comfortable 3-0 win in Cyprus, meaning that after 5 rounds, Scotland had the perfect record with 12 goals scored and 1 conceded, and were of course sitting top of the group. A trip to Seville was next on in a game where a point would be enough to guarantee a spot at the Euros. Scott McTominay would score an incredible free kick from an angle to give Scotland the lead. VAR ruled it out for a foul on the goalkeeper, and Spain would go on to win 2-0. Spain, however, would defeat Norway a few days later to guarantee Scotland a trip to Germany. The campaign would finish with a trip to Tbilisi, where a 92nd minute equaliser from Lawrence Shankland would see Scotland draw 2-2, while a mad 3-0 draw against Norway at Hampden would see Scotland finish second, 4 points behind Spain, but 6 points clearing Norway in third. After an impressive qualification campaign, Scotland would be put in a group with the host Germany, tournament regulars Switzerland, and a Hungary side who were enjoying a relative renaissance. Once again, expectations were made of a potential knockout qualification, especially with the win over Spain not being long in the memory. In the opening game of the tournament then, Scotland fans would take over in Munich as they took on the hosts, and were battered 5-1. It was Scotland's biggest defeat since losing by the same scoreline in a friendly to the United States, and the biggest in a competitive match since the 6-0 loss to the Dutch in the Euro 2004 playoff. After the 2021 Euros and the playoff defeat, there were people calling for Clarke to go, but it was very much a fringe opinion at the time. After this game, it really started to grow, so improvement was very much needed going into the next 2 fixtures. In Cologne, the Tartan Army again packed out the stadium, but this time around, Scott McTominay would give Scotland the lead, but this was ruined by Anthony Ralston playing a terrible back pass that was hit first time by Shaqiri into the top corner. Both teams would have chances with Hanley hitting the post with a header, but the game would end in a 1-1 draw, leaving Scotland needing a win against a Hungarian side who had lost both their games to qualify. Stuttgart, however, would see heartbreak as despite multiple efforts and a penalty call being denied, Hungary would score on the counter with the last kick of the game to send Scotland home. The Clarke out discourse really ramped up after this, and it became a lot more of a debate, but Clarke had been given a 2-year contract following qualification, so there was at least an acceptance that this wouldn't happen until 2026. The following Nations League campaign saw Scotland compete in League A, and expectations were minimal to say the least, especially after being drawn in a group with Poland, Croatia, and Portugal. The first game saw Poland travel to Hampden, who would take a 2-0 lead into half-time, but Billy Gilmour would get a goal back within a minute of the second half kicking off, before McTominay would equalise. Unfortunately, Poland would get a winner through a Zalewski free kick in the 97th minute. The following 2 matches would see 2-1 defeats away in Zagreb and Lisbon, with both games seeing Scotland take the lead, leaving Scotland with 3 losses from 3 games. The second half of the Nations League saw a big improvement. Portugal would be held to a 0-0 draw at Hampden, which led to Ronaldo having a meltdown. Very funny. John McGinn would score an 86-minute winner against Croatia to lift Scotland off the bottom of the table, before a trip to Warsaw where a win and a Croatia loss would see Scotland qualify for the quarter-finals. But a defeat would see Scotland automatically relegated to League B, with Croatia avoiding defeat, meaning the best Scotland do was end up in a playoff. Croatia would get a draw against Portugal, but that did not stop Scotland getting a 2-1 win in Warsaw thanks to an Andy Robertson goal in the 93rd minute. With this momentum then, Scotland would play Greece in a playoff to keep their spot in League A, and it got off to a great start, with McTominay's first half penalty being the difference maker in Athens. At Hampden, however, playoff heartbreak would return, with the Greeks running out 3-0 winners, sending Scotland back into League B. The reprieve from any Greek tragedy, however, wouldn't last, as they would be in our World Cup qualifying group alongside Belarus and Denmark. The opening game saw a trip to Copenhagen, where the game and result can only be described as pragmatic, with a 0-0 draw being the final score. This was followed by a 2-0 win behind closed doors against Belarus to see us second after 2 games. Greece would make a return to Hampden, but after taking the lead just past the hour mark, goals from Ryan Christie and Lewis Ferguson would see Scotland turn it around, before Dykes finish it off with one of the more bizarre goals scored at Hampden. A win against Belarus at Hampden continued the unbeaten run, and with Denmark beating Greece, the group became a straight shootout between Scotland and Denmark. It was all in our hands. Avoid defeat against Greece, and a win at Hampden would be enough to qualify for the World Cup. We went to Athens, and after just over an hour, we were 3-0 down. Goals in quick succession from Ben Gannon Doak and Ryan Christie would not be enough, and Scotland were almost certainly heading for a playoff. Somehow, despite having lost 6-0 in the prior fixture, Belarus had drawn with Denmark. It was back in our hands. Hampden Park has proven to be the difference in games against tougher opponents. Surely, this time, in a big game, Scotland won't falter.
Was the near ball. Scotland back in front! Gets to not entirely clear. Kieran Tierney! It's McLean! He's looking to go for goal! From the halfway line! It's chips!
After one of the greatest games in Scottish national team history, Steve Clarke and his team had guided Scotland to the World Cup. The first time they'd be playing on the biggest stage in 28 years. It also meant Scotland had qualified for 3 of the last 4 tournaments, a run that also hadn't been seen since the 1990s. After quite an incredible achievement though, people still had their questions about Clarke and his style of play and tactics, with the high moments being delivered seemingly through individual moments of magic. But the SFA seemed to ignore this, and in the build-up to the tournament, it was announced Clarke had signed a new 4-year deal. This was met with utter confusion with the fans who were siding towards the majority of letting him go should we fail to get out of the group. Getting out of the group, however, would be incredibly tough, as while we would have Haiti in our group, Scotland would be drawn against recently emailed African champions Morocco and South American giants Brazil, both teams ranked in the top 10 in the FIFA World Rankings. I think we all know what happened here. If not, then I made reviews of each match, but in short, Haiti we managed to get a win, but it was less than convincing. The Morocco game was undone within 70 seconds, and Brazil comfortably beat us 3-0. Following our eventual elimination, it was announced at midnight UK time that Steve Clarke had resigned as Scotland manager. The initial reaction was very much supportive of this decision, especially after yet another lacklustre tournament performance. But now that it will have been nearly a month since his departure, it's time to give a less emotionally charged judgment of his tenure. The positives are very obvious. He broke the tournament hoodoo, twice qualifying automatically. Considering the absolute hellscape qualification campaigns have been in the 20 years prior to his arrival, that's a massive achievement. You also look at some of the results along the way, from being battered by Kazakhstan before his arrival, to beating Spain, the second half of Nations League A, the 3-2 win against Israel, the 2-0 and 4-2 wins against Denmark, and while the performance in the game wasn't something to be proud about, we did win a game at the World Cup. The negatives, of course, are the fact that at these tournaments we were generally inept. Very little attacking output, scoring just 4 goals across 9 games, losing 5-1 to Germany. It was not enjoyable to say the least. Outside the tournaments, there were the playoff losses to Ukraine and Greece, which were definitely missed opportunities, and we got lucky in quite a few aspects. Team selections are also a source of criticism. If we look at the World Cup squad, the forward department definitely got questioned the most, with Lyndon Dykes being selected over the likes of Ollie McBurney, Kieran Bowie, and to a lesser extent, Robbie Ure. When Billy Gilmore got injured, instead of being replaced by someone like Lennon Miller, Tyler Fletcher was called up despite having barely any minutes at a senior level. Overall though, I think after enough time, people will come round to at least respect the job he did. Based on when he took over, he's done a great job, but you can't help but think a better manager would have gone further in at least one of the tournaments. It will be interesting to see how his successor does though. There's probably going to be a fair bit of upheaval considering Scotland are basically guaranteed a place in the 2028 Euros. Of the squad that went to America, players I don't expect to be involved beyond this summer are Craig Golden, Grant Hanley, maybe Kenny McLean, and probably Lyndon Dykes. For 2030, you could be looking at McGinn being away, say McChristie, Jack Hendry, Andy Robertson, and depending on fitness levels, Kieran Tierney. I'm pretty confident, though, that any successor will build on the work Clarke has done, who has at least given us a reason to believe in the national team once again. That's all for this video, and of course, I hope you enjoyed. How would you sum up Clarke's tenure? Who would you want to replace him? Let us know in the comments below. Channel memberships are available. Those who have signed up have their names on screen now. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are all appreciated, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.